There is none like you.
No.
On Father's Day, we all realize that we have been blessed by our earthly fathers.
Yes.
But as Jesus taught us in the prayer, the master prayer that he taught us, our Father who art in heaven. He is our Father. God, we thank you for your presence, your company today. In all times, as we know, even when you are silent, we believe. When God is silent, we believe. And today we pray that you will talk to us, God, because we need to hear your voice. We believe in you. In your name we pray. Amen. There is a very famous story of translators of the Bible working in tribes in Africa, trying to, at the same time, learn a new language of African people, and then translate the Bible into the language. They ran into one problem in one of the cases with one of the many languages. There was not word for obeying. So the translators were in shock, and they say, well, how, in this language, how do you say when you are going to do what you're told? If your father or your mother tells you to do something and you're going to obey, what is the word that you use? And then the response is, well, obviously, they said, we use the word for believe. And then the missionaries who were there to preach the gospel, they were actually being preached the gospel. You see the reversal? Sometimes we go and we think that we are bringing the truth, but if we are carefully, if we are careful, we listen to God's word everywhere. So they learned that some people got it right, and that is believing is obeying. If we believe in God, if we say that we have faith in God, and if we believe in our parents, then we obey, we do as we are told. That is a foreign concept in our culture today.
Yes.
Because we're taught that we first have to experience, we first have to prove. And then once we, through an experiment, we find out that what we're being told is true, then we do it. Mm-hmm. So the order of things is reversed. You first challenge something, you do different, you experiment, and then after hitting yourself and a few speed bumps along the road and having so many trouble, then you realize, okay, if I had done what I was told at the beginning, how many trouble I would have avoided in my life. But that is a foreign concept today. We value the individual right to choose whatever we want.
Amen.
As opposed to obeying what God tells us. What a radically different story we have in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 35, that we had read for us. The context of this scripture comes in a time in which Jerusalem was being attacked by the Babylonians, and the city was about to be destroyed. Why? Well, the prophet Jeremiah says, because you did not obey what your Father in heaven told you. God gave you laws. God told you, do not worship foreign gods. Do not worship idols. Do not do as other nations around you are doing. Just obey God and worship only God, and they did not do it. So the nation was growing weaker and weaker to the point that now the Babylonians were invading, and Jerusalem was about to fall. And God asked Jeremiah to do something. You want to do an experiment? You want to see what faithful people do? You want to prove something? If something is good doing or not? Jeremiah told God, just call the Rechabites. I wonder if I can even pronounce that. Rechabites, the son of Jehonadab, called them and served wine before them and told them to have a drink. Yes, it's an experiment. So the prophet summons all this little tribe. This was actually a sub-tribe, a sub-people, a group of people within the Israelites. They were all of them Israelites. You know that they had different tribes and different customs, different areas. So the Rechabites come to the temple in Jerusalem. They were actually living in Jerusalem for reasons that I'm going to explain in a little while. And they go to a court, a room in the temple adjacent to the temple in Jerusalem, and they are served wine, lots of it. They had cups, and then they had pitchers. Just go and have a blast. You know, Jerusalem was about to be surrounded. Food and drink was scarce. This was their opportunity to actually have a blast. Put yourself, drink and eat and be merry before we go through worse times. And their response of the Rechabites is surprising. They say, no. Our forefathers taught us, they asked us that we would not drink wine. And therefore, because our forefathers told us, then we do not drink wine. When you dig into the story a little bit, you find out that actually Jehonadab and Rechab, they had lived about 250 plus years before Jeremiah. During the week, as I was preparing the sermon, I had the blessing of a visit from Gene Kelly, and we were talking about this text, and he knew it all. And Gene tells me, do you even remember how many years had passed? And I said, no, I don't remember, but I will take a look, and I will find out. The king Jehu reigned in the year 843 before Jesus. And the destruction of Jerusalem happened in the year 587, around those times. So over 250 years have passed. And this little tribe, they maintained the traditions that they received from their forefathers. And it was not only about drinking wine. There were three conditions. Do not drink wine. Do not build houses. You should live in tents. So, just leave off your nomadic sheep. So basically what was going on here was they used to be a nomadic tribe. They didn't have wine, they didn't have agriculture. So they lived off their flocks. And if you just read the whole chapter of Jeremiah 35, it's a beautiful chapter. They explain to Jeremiah, we're here in Jerusalem because the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar, is about to invade our land, and we decided to come here to find protection.
Yes, yes.
We are living here among you in the city of Jerusalem. But we maintain the tradition that our forefathers taught us.
Wow.
Do not drink wine. Do not do agriculture or live tents or build houses. Just live in tents and live off your flocks. Just maintain your traditions.
Yes.
And listen how they had to move to the city for protection. But they had maintained their own traditions that 200 plus years ago, or before this, their forefathers had taught them. What a lesson in obedience.
Yes, yes. My God. Thank you.
What a lesson in adapting. They had to adapt. They had to make changes. The Babylonians were coming. They would have been foolish to stay outside in the fields when those Babylonians were coming hungry and thirsty and destroying everything. They would have been the first victims. So they adapt. They had, in a way, they had to change the traditions. But they were holding on to them as much as they could when they moved into the city of Jerusalem. What a lesson in, yes, sometimes we need to adapt to new realities,
Amen.
but the traditions that we were given, we maintain. I do need to clarify something though. This text, much to, oops, I have to say something here that maybe my dad would not want me to say. I have to be clear. I have to go by the word of God. And my dad would approve eventually if I just tell him. My dad is not Stevens. He doesn't drink. I married into a family that they were taught. My father-in-law, he was the same way. No drinking in the house. I respect my father. There's no alcohol in my house when my dad is not there visiting. I have to be open and clear with you. This text, chapter 35 of Jeremiah, is not a command to not drink.
Okay.
We would be mistaken if you take it that way. So let me clarify that. This was a tribe that lived of nomadic customs. They did not practice agriculture. They didn't have vineyards. They didn't have grape. And they didn't drink. And their forefathers told them, you just don't drink. But see that even Jesus had wine.
Amen.
When he goes to the wedding in Cana of Galilee.
Amen.
Now, we know for sure that he never got drunk.
Uh-huh.
We preach against drunkenness and excess of any kind. We are against excesses of any kind whatsoever, including chocolate. So, do not take this text. I'm not here to tell you that you should go now and live as an abstemious. Totally 100% abstain from alcohol.
Amen.
But we have important commands that we have received from our forefathers as far back as we go. You go to your own father, and you have important things that you learn. I am the person I am because my dad taught me, and it still teaches me. I still go to him for advice.
Amen.
I wish that sometimes he would come to me also for advice. Because now I'm 51, I have learned about this world. This is a changing world. Technology now is not the same as it was 5 years ago. 1 year ago, technology is not the same. So I'm glad when my dad asked me, hey, what is the best way to use this? And then I have a chance to talk to my dad and teach him a few things.
Amen.
But when it comes to wisdom, I have to drink from the deep wealth of knowledge that he has. So that's your father. Just keep going back. The founders of our nation. Think about the generation before us who fought the First and Second World War and the tradition of sacrifice that they taught us, and how after they came back they built this nation as we have it today. It was basically, for all the young people, it was just given to us. All of us immigrants, like myself, I came into the nation that I did not build. And I enjoy all the wealth that has been built in this nation. Go a little back farther. Think about the founders of our nation. And if you go farther and farther, we can go on to the Apostolic Creed that we said today. Go into the Old Testament. And you will see that you can go back and you can drink from a well of knowledge that is eternal because it comes from God. God is the source of all truth. And wherever you see truth, hold on to it, it comes from God. Amen. Wherever you see it. So the Rechabites, they found out that walls were good to protect against the enemies. And they moved into Jerusalem. But they make adaptations, they change a little bit of their ways of life, but as much as possible, they have to hold on to their tradition, and they say, I'm not going to drink wine. How are we going to honor our fathers? our grandfathers, our forefathers that built this nation. How are we going to honor those who gave us the faith we have? Now, another more important question. How are we going to honor and obey God, our Father?
Hey, thank you.
If you believe in God, you have to obey God. And there are things that are very clear in the Bible. And we have to obey the things that God has taught us. And at this time of sadness and sorrow and mourning in our nation, in which the most beautiful, desired peace that we could have has been once again shaken. People who come to church just to pray and read the Bible. And somebody decides that they have the right and the command and the duty to go into God's house, pull out a gun, and kill innocent people. Why? Because there is an ideology of racism and of white supremacy from which this person eventually obviously drank. So, even when we drink from our own well, we have to be careful. And sometimes we have to make adaptations. Our forefathers in the Constitution, they wrote, all men are created equal.
Yes, yes.
And through the years, we have learned that they said all men are created equal simply because that was the language in the past.
Amen.
But when we say all men are created equal, the Supreme Court has said that all men are created equal. All people, regardless of the color of their skin, they have been created equal. Regardless of the nation, even though they said that for the U.S., they were actually creating a nation that would be, and would continue to be, a nation of immigrants. So that's why they say, we, all the people, we are created equal in the eyes of God. So, to have an ideology, or to have prejudices that say that one race is superior to the other, is just simply not only wrong, but it is a sin before God. If you want to talk about sins, maybe we should focus on those things that are destroying our nation, and understand and debunk all these myths of race superiority, and especially among those myths of race superiority, one specifically, white supremacy. We have the idea that some people believe that some races are better than others. Let's think about that just for a minute. You know what a race is? Race is an artificially subjectively constructed idea that is actually wrong. What is a race? There's only one race. That is human race. We're all Homo sapiens. We're all, in the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. We were created, how? In the image of God. We were all created in the image of God. And then, as we fulfill the commandment that we have in the book of Genesis 2, chapter 1, the same verses, where it says, one of the first commandments, actually I think this is the first commandment. I know if I ask Jim, he will tell me what it is. Therefore, go and multiply, fill the earth, be fruitful, and multiply. And so it happened that as we moved around, we, human race, we adapted to different geographies, different climates. Those who moved up way north, the same way as you have white polar bears, the polar bears and white dogs in the cold, frigid parts of our planet, then you have white people. But we have to realize that we are different only because we adapted to different places
Yes, Lord.
in our world, in our planet, as we were fulfilling that commandment from God to fill the earth.
Amen.
But what race are you? That's a funny question that I have to answer a lot of times when I get those forms that you get when you're going to do so many things today you have to mark. And they're pre-selected
Come on.
for you. And sometimes, a lot of times, they don't match
Come
who
on.
I am.
Woo!
I have to just figure out who am I? What am I? I will tell you who you are, regardless of the way you look in the outside. You are created in the image of God.
Amen.
Come on now.
You are a son or a daughter of God, and we are all created equals. There is no superiority. There is one thing that did happen, and that is that some nations are where they were and they are more intelligent than others. You know why? Because they allow others to come in, and then they learn from each other. And the nations that have opened themselves to other cultures and to other people coming in and have learned from each other,
Come on, Pastor.
those are the ones that have prospered. So why do we have a great United States? Because we were smart in allowing people to come here, and this is the land of opportunities. Just come and work hard and give the best of you, and that's how this nation is being built. I'm sorry that it's a little time afternoon, but there's something else I have to say because we need to talk about those things. There is the myth of white supremacy. It is so wrong. And we have beautiful language to talk about it. We talk about the bedrock or the cradle of Western civilization, as though Western civilization was the best. And we say we go to Greece. Was that what you were taught? What you learned today? Greece, the cradle of Western civilization. Just go a little deeper. And you will find out that Greece, they got their paintings from Egypt, Africa. Just go and look at the beautiful coffins. We talk about how the Egyptians mummified their ancestors, but we don't talk about how because this is the part that deteriorates the most on the outside, where the mummies are placed. And they were painted. Those coffins were painted. And if you look at European portraiture, when it came back in the early Middle Ages, it was basically a copy of Egyptian art. Look at the coffins. They were painted, they were decorated, and that's where the Greeks got their painting.
Mama.
We talk about Roman architecture. They only look at the Egyptian architecture and Babylonian architecture, and you will see how actually civilization is just one. And any nation that has prospered is only because they were smart to realize that they had to allow others to teach them.
Come on, man.
Hey,
Come on,
mama.
man. Tell us, man.
So there is no any type of race superiority, specifically, there is no white supremacy. We're all created equals in the eyes of God. So we have to go back and realize that we have one Father.
Yes, Lord.
And today, as we celebrate Father's Day, we have to make a commitment to obey our Father, to obey God. And realize that, look around you, what do you see? You see brothers and sisters. That's what you see when you look around. brothers and sisters. And if we are what we are today, that's because some people decided that it was a smart thing to learn from others. And that's the world today. We need to pray for peace. We need to pray for a better United States,
Amen.
in which diversity is freely appreciated. It is a blessing. If we want to be a better nation, we want to allow everybody to make a contribution. We don't need to kill each other anymore. We don't need to think that somebody is better than others.
Amen.
If we obey God, we're all equals. In this time.
Yes.
Put God first. Put God first and realize that we're all brothers and sisters. So there are families today that don't have their father because they were massacred. But they do have brothers and sisters. And they do have fathers that step in and fill that role of being a loving community. And we will not stop being a house of peace and a house of prayer and a house in which everybody is welcome. That's what we like. Open hearts, open minds, open doors. And may God strengthen us in that way. May God turn us into a stronger nation, a stronger church in which everybody is appreciated and welcome. Let's pray. Dear God, we have been hurt. We're wounded by hatred and by false ideas that some people are better than others. Forgive us.
Yes, Lord.
And help us to build a better nation in which people are protected and we are one under you. So we pray for the victims of senseless crimes. Even churches that have been burned, and now churches in which shootings take place, and mosques, and synagogues,
Yes.
and restaurants, and
Yes.
places of work, in which people go to produce, and then they're gone down.
Amen.
Forgive us, God, and teach us that we're all one in your eyes. And teach us to love one another. Teach us to obey you. Teach us to bow down. And
Yes.
even as we mingle with one another, because of the circumstances of this world, as the rabbis had to move into Jerusalem, but they were faithful to their tradition. Help us to, as we mingle with one another, help us to learn from one another to obey you and be faithful to you.
Yes, Lord.
In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.